The rain hammered against the cracked asphalt with a violence that seemed personal, each drop striking my exposed skin like tiny frozen needles. I pressed myself deeper into the narrow alley between Romano's delicatessen and the abandoned shoe repair shop, my thin hospital scrubs offering no protection against the November storm that had descended on Little Italy like a curse. The smell of rotting garbage mixed with the metallic scent of rain-soaked concrete filled my nostrils, making my empty stomach churn with nausea. My hands trembled as I clutched the plastic bag containing everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, my nursing certificate, and the engagement ring Vincent had thrown at my feet before slamming the apartment door in my face. The diamond caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds, mocking me with its false promises of forever. Forever had lasted exactly 18 months, ending the moment I'd walked into our bedroom to find him tangled in sheets with my supposed best friend, Rebecca. "You're nothing, Faith." Vincent's words echoed in my mind, as cold as the rain soaking through my sneakers. A charity case I took pity on. Did you really think someone like me would actually marry trailer trash like you? I had nowhere to go. The nursing program had drained my savings, and my first paycheck from Mount Sinai wasn't due for another 2 weeks. The homeless shelter was full. I'd already called 3 times. My phone battery had died hours ago, leaving me more isolated than ever. Every doorway in the neighborhood was occupied by others seeking refuge from the storm, their suspicious glares making it clear I wasn't welcome to share their meager shelter. A violent shiver racked my body, and I realized I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my thoughts sluggish and confused. This was how people died, I thought with detached medical clarity. Hypothermia didn't discriminate between the educated and the desperate. I'd studied it in nursing school, never imagining I'd experience it firsthand. The alley spun around me as I tried to stand, my legs refusing to support my weight. My vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the edges as my body began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature. The plastic bag slipped from my nerveless fingers, scattering my few possessions across the wet pavement like debris from a life that was rapidly dissolving. I thought of my mother. Dead 5 years now from cancer I couldn't afford to treat properly. She'd warned me about Vincent, seen through his charm to the calculating man beneath. Some people collect broken things because they like the power of fixing them, she'd whispered during one of her lucid moments near the end. But they never actually fix anything, baby girl. They just like owning the pieces. The world tilted sideways as my knees hit the concrete. The cold was becoming almost warm now, a dangerous sign I recognized from my emergency medicine rotation. My body was giving up the fight, core temperature dropping to critical levels. Part of me welcomed the approaching unconsciousness. At least in sleep, I wouldn't feel the betrayal burning in my chest, or taste the bitter ash of my shattered dreams. Footsteps echoed off the alley walls, but they seemed to come from very far away. Voices spoke in hushed Italian, words I couldn't understand, but that carried an urgency that cut through my haze. Strong hands touched my shoulders, and I tried to recoil, but lacked the strength. A man's voice, deep and commanding, spoke in accented English that somehow made my name sound like a prayer. "Cristo, she's freezing to death. Get the car, now." I wanted to protest, to explain that I wasn't a drug addict or prostitute, just a nurse who'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong man. But my tongue felt thick and useless, my throat constricted with cold and unshed tears. Darkness was pulling me under like a warm blanket, promising escape from the pain and humiliation of this nightmare. The last thing I remembered was being lifted by arms that felt impossibly strong, carried against a chest that radiated heat through expensive wool. A cologne I'd never smelled before, sandalwood and something darker, dangerous, filled my senses as my head lolled against a shoulder that seemed to have been carved from marble. "You're safe now," the voice murmured, and despite everything my rational mind screamed about accepting help from strangers in dark alleys, I believed him. There was something in his tone, an absolute certainty that made me think this man had never spoken an empty promise in his life. The warm interior of a car enveloped me, leather seats soft against my frozen skin. Gentle hands tucked a cashmere coat around my shoulders, and I caught a glimpse of gold cufflinks, manicured fingers, the edge of what might have been a scar along a strong jawline. Important details my nursing training told me to catalog, but the information slipped away like water through my fingers as unconsciousness finally claimed me. When awareness crept back, it came in stages. First, warmth, blessed, encompassing heat that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. Then softness beneath me, sheets with a thread count that had to cost more than my monthly rent. The scent of clean linen and that same masculine cologne lingered in the air, along with something else. Fresh flowers and the faint aroma of expensive coffee. I opened my eyes to find myself in a bedroom that belonged in a magazine. Cream-colored walls adorned with what looked like original artwork. Floor-to-ceiling windows draped in silk that filtered the morning sunlight into a golden glow. The bed I lay in was easily king-sized, piled with pillows and covered in a duvet so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud. Panic struck me like a physical blow. Where was I? Who had brought me here? My nursing scrubs were gone, replaced by a silk nightgown I'd never seen before. Someone had undressed me, bathed me, put me to bed like a child. The violation of it made my skin crawl, even as my rational mind acknowledged that whoever had done it had likely saved my life. I sat up too quickly, the room spinning around me as blood rushed from my head. A glass of water and 2 pills sat on the nightstand beside me, along with a note written in precise, elegant handwriting. For the headache, you're safe. Rest. The authoritative tone in those few words made something flutter in my chest. Not fear, but something more complicated. Attraction mixed with wariness, the primal female response to a predator who might choose to protect, rather than destroy. I'd felt it once before, years ago, when a attending physician had dressed down a resident who'd been harassing me. Power used on my behalf instead of against me was a foreign concept. My phone, somehow charged and functional, lay beside the note. The missed calls and texts from Vincent made my stomach clench. First angry demands to know where I was, then increasingly frantic apologies, as he realized I was truly gone. Rebecca had called too, her voicemails full of tearful excuses that meant nothing to me now. A soft knock at the door made me freeze. Miss Buchanan? The voice was female, heavily accented, warm but respectful. Mr. Moretti asked me to see if you needed anything. I have brought you some clothes. Mr. Moretti. The name meant nothing to me, but it sounded Italian, strong. Old world in a way that suggested tradition, family, honor. Very different from Vincent's new money desperation to prove himself worthy of acceptance in circles that would never truly embrace him. Come in, I called, wrapping the silk robe I found at the foot of the bed around myself. The woman who entered was perhaps 60, gray-haired and kindly, carrying an armful of clothes that looked expensive but appropriate. Not the sort of outfit a man with ill intentions would provide for his victim. I am Maria, she said with a smile that reached her eyes. I take care of the house. Mr. Moretti, he was very worried about you last night. Found you in the alley near his club, nearly frozen to death. Poor thing. What were you doing out in such weather? Her genuine concern undid something in my chest, and before I could stop myself, tears were streaming down my face. The whole humiliating story poured out. Vincent's betrayal, my homelessness, the desperate wandering that had led me to that alley. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally making sympathetic sounds in Italian that needed no translation. Men, she said finally, shaking her head with disgust. Some of them, they have no honor. But Mr. Moretti, he is not like this Vincent. He brings you here, has his own doctor check on you, makes sure you are warm and safe. This is what a real man does. I wanted to ask about this mysterious benefactor, but Maria was already laying out clothes and explaining the schedule. Mr. Moretti had gone to his office but would return for lunch. I was welcome to explore the house, use the library, the garden if the weather cleared. There was no pressure to leave, no expectation of payment or favors. Just old-fashioned hospitality extended to a stranger in need. As I dressed in clothes that fit perfectly, too perfectly, suggesting someone with an excellent eye for women's sizing, I tried to make sense of my situation. Men who found dying women in alleys and brought them home were either saints or predators. Saints were rare in my experience, but predators usually didn't provide silk nightgowns and respectful housekeepers. The house itself told a story of wealth and taste that went beyond mere money. Original hardwood floors gleamed under Persian rugs that probably cost more than my education. Books lined the walls in multiple languages, their worn spines suggesting they were read rather than merely displayed. Family photographs in silver frames showed generations of strong-jawed men and elegant women, creating a sense of history and continuity that my own rootless existence lacked entirely. I was studying a particular photo, a young man in military dress uniform with eyes that seemed familiar, when footsteps in the hallway announced someone's approach. They were measured, confident, the walk of a man who owned everything he surveyed. My heart began racing for reasons I couldn't entirely explain. Anticipation mixing with nervousness in a cocktail that made my hands tremble. The door opened, and Francesco Moretti entered my life like a force of nature carefully contained in an expensive suit. He was nothing like Vincent, and that thought struck me first, before I could even process the specifics of his appearance. Where Vincent was conventionally handsome in an obvious, almost desperate way, this man possessed something far more dangerous, an unconscious magnetism that seemed to bend reality around him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never doubted his place in the world or his ability to reshape it according to his will. Dark hair, perfectly styled, but with just enough natural wave to suggest it would curl if left to its own devices. Olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean heritage, and eyes the color of espresso that seemed to catalog everything in their path with calculating precision. His suit was charcoal gray, clearly bespoke, tailored to emphasize the powerful build beneath without being ostentatious about it. Everything about him whispered old money, established power, the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself because it simply was. Miss Buchanan. His voice carried the faint Italian accent I remembered from my semi-conscious state, but now I could hear the cultivation beneath it. This was a man equally comfortable in boardrooms and back alleys, someone who spoke multiple languages fluently and could navigate any social situation with effortless charm. "I trust you slept well?" I found myself nodding before I'd consciously decided to respond. There was something hypnotic about his presence, the way he seemed to command attention without demanding it. "Yes, thank you. And thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you." A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastatingly attractive. "There is no debt between us. You needed help. I was able to provide it. This is what civilized people do for one another." The emphasis on civilized wasn't lost on me, a subtle dig at Vincent's behavior that somehow made me feel vindicated rather than pitied. This man had assessed the situation and found my ex-fiancée wanting without needing to hear my side of the story. The validation was intoxicating, a balm to my wounded pride that I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "Maria tells me you are a nurse," he continued, settling into the chair across from where I stood by the window. The movement was economical, controlled, like everything else about him. "Mount Sinai Hospital, yes? A prestigious position for someone so young." The fact that he'd taken the time to learn about my profession, to speak of it with respect rather than dismiss it as Vincent often had, sent warmth spreading through my chest. I just graduated from their nursing program. Yesterday was supposed to be my first official day on the cardiac unit. Supposed to be? His eyebrows rose slightly, and I realized I'd revealed more than I intended. This man had a way of encouraging honesty that felt almost supernatural, as if lies would simply evaporate in his presence. I don't know if I still have the job. I missed orientation because of everything that happened. They might have given my position to someone else. The admission hurt more than I'd expected. That job had represented my future, my escape from dependence on others, my chance to prove that a girl from a trailer park could make something of herself. Francesco. I found myself thinking of him by his first name, though he hadn't given me permission. Leaned forward slightly, his expression growing serious. What is the name of your supervisor? Dr. Patricia Williams. She's the head of cardiac nursing, but I doubt she'll understand why I disappeared without calling in. The hospital has strict policies about reliability. He pulled out a phone that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent and dialed a number from memory. The conversation that followed was brief, conducted in the kind of tone that suggested he was accustomed to getting his way without explanation. I couldn't hear the other side, but I watched his face carefully, noting the moment when his expression softened with what might have been satisfaction. Dr. Williams sends her regards, he said after ending the call. She was quite concerned when you didn't appear yesterday and had already placed you on medical leave pending your recovery from what she now understands was a family emergency. Your position will be held for as long as necessary. I stared at him, speechless. What did you tell her? The truth, in broad strokes. That you had experienced a personal crisis that left you temporarily without housing, and that you were recovering under the care of friends who wished to remain anonymous. Dr. Williams seemed more relieved than anything. Apparently she thought quite highly of your performance during training. The casual way he'd solved a problem that had been keeping me awake, with worry, was both gratifying and slightly terrifying. This was clearly a man accustomed to making things happen with a phone call, to having doors open at his request. But what kind of business gave someone that level of influence? What exactly did Francesco Moretti do for a living? I should go, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. I've imposed on your kindness long enough, and I need to figure out my living situation before I can return to work. Where will you go? The question was asked gently, but with the precision of someone who already knew the answer. Your apartment was shared with your former fiancé, who has made it clear you are not welcome to return. Your friend Rebecca has been trying to reach you, but I suspect her motivations are less than pure given her role in recent events. You have no family in the area, no savings to speak of, and your first paycheck is still weeks away. Each fact hit like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He'd done his research, learned enough about my situation to understand exactly how trapped I was, but his tone held no judgment, no suggestion that my circumstances were anything but temporary setbacks that could be overcome with the right resources. How do you know all that? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. I make it my business to understand people who enter my sphere, he replied with the casual honesty of someone stating an obvious fact. Knowledge prevents misunderstandings, protects all parties involved. You are here because you needed help, not because you sought to take advantage of anyone. This distinction matters to me. The implication that others might have tried to take advantage of him hung in the air between us, along with the suggestion that such attempts had not ended well for the perpetrators. This was not a man who suffered deception gladly, but neither was he one who punished the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. I have a proposition for you, he continued before I could respond. My mother has been unwell recently, nothing life-threatening, but her doctor has recommended she have nursing care available during her recovery. She is particular about who she allows into her personal space, but I believe you might suit her needs perfectly. The offer was elegant in its simplicity, a way for me to earn my keep while maintaining my dignity, to be useful rather than merely grateful. But it also meant staying in this house, in his orbit, subject to that penetrating gaze and the dangerous pull I felt whenever he was near. "What's wrong with your mother?" The nurse in me couldn't help asking, professional interest overriding personal caution. "She had a mild heart episode last month, what her cardiologist calls a warning shot. She's responding well to medication, but she needs monitoring. Someone to ensure she takes her pills, watches her diet, recognizes any concerning symptoms. The agency nurses they've sent have been inadequate." I could imagine. If Francesco commanded rooms simply by entering them, his mother was probably a force of nature who would intimidate anyone without the backbone to stand up to her. The challenge appealed to me more than it should have. I'd always gotten along well with difficult patients, finding that they respected honesty and competence over deference. What would the arrangement entail exactly? Room and board here, naturally. A salary commensurate with your hospital position, plus a bonus for the private nature of the work. Your own schedule as long as my mother's needs are met. And when you're ready to return to Mount Sinai, glowing references that will open any door you might wish to walk through. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. Men like Francesco Moretti didn't offer charity without expecting something in return, even if that something wasn't immediately apparent. But I was drowning in options, and he was offering me not just a life preserver, but a luxury yacht. "Can I meet her first? Your mother?" His smile broadened, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from him. "I would be disappointed if you hadn't asked. Professional curiosity is exactly what she needs. Someone who will treat her as a patient rather than tiptoeing around her because of who she is." Who she is. Another hint at the family's true status. Another piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But curiosity had always been my weakness, and Francesco Moretti was the most intriguing mystery I'd ever encountered. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted my thoughts, followed by voices speaking rapid Italian in what sounded like urgent tones. Francesco's expression shifted instantly, the charming host disappearing behind a mask of cold authority that transformed him into someone I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," he said, standing with fluid grace. "Business calls. Maria will show you to my mother's room when you're ready. Take your time deciding. The offer stands regardless of your answer." But as he moved toward the door, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. The edge of a shoulder holster beneath his perfectly tailored jacket, the unmistakable outline of a weapon that spoke of a world far more dangerous than I'd imagined. What exactly had I stumbled into? The walk to Francesca Moretti's room felt like a journey into the heart of a mystery I was increasingly certain I shouldn't want to solve. Maria led me through hallways lined with photographs that told the story of a family steeped in tradition and power. Men in expensive suits shaking hands with politicians I recognized, women dripping with jewels at charity galas, children posed formally in settings that spoke of generational wealth. But it was the older photographs that gave me pause. Black and white images from what looked like the 1940s and 50s, showing men whose faces held the same aristocratic bone structure as Francesco's, but whose eyes carried a hardness that seemed almost predatory. These weren't businessmen in the conventional sense, I realized with growing unease. These were men who had built their empire through methods that didn't appear in annual reports or board meetings. "Mrs. Moretti, she's very excited to meet you," Maria said as we paused outside an ornate wooden door. "She has been asking about the beautiful nurse her son rescued from the storm. But you must understand, she is not used to strangers. Speak honestly with her. She respects courage above all else." The woman I found propped against silk pillows in a bed that could have belonged to European royalty was nothing like what I'd expected. Francesca Moretti was small and elegant, with silver hair styled in a way that suggested a standing appointment at the city's most exclusive salon. Her dark eyes, so much like her son's, assessed me with the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades reading people's intentions from their expressions. But there was a fragility to her that my trained eye immediately recognized. The slight blue tinge to her lips, the careful way she modulated her breathing, the pale translucence of skin that spoke of a cardiovascular system under strain. This was a woman whose body was betraying her, even as her mind remained razor-sharp. "So," she said in English only lightly touched by an Italian accent, "you are the little sparrow my Francesco found freezing in an alley. Sit down, child. Let me look at you properly." I took the chair beside her bed, meeting her direct gaze with what I hoped was professional composure. "Mrs. Moretti, your son has offered me a position caring for you during your recovery. Before I accept, I need to understand exactly what kind of care you require." A smile spread across her face, transforming it from merely elegant to genuinely beautiful. "Straight to business. Good. I detest people who waste time with false pleasantries when there is important work to be done." For the next hour, she submitted to the most thorough assessment I'd ever conducted outside a hospital setting. I checked her pulse, her blood pressure, listened to her heart and lungs, reviewed her medications and recent test results. What I found concerned me more than her casual dismissal of her condition suggested was warranted. "Your ejection fraction is 42%, I said, referring to the measurement of how well her heart was pumping blood. "That's classified as heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. You should be on a much more aggressive treatment protocol, and you definitely shouldn't be dismissing your symptoms as minor inconveniences." "Ah," she said with obvious satisfaction. "Francesco said you were sharp. Yes, my heart is failing. Slowly, but failing nonetheless. The doctors want to put me in the hospital, attach me to machines, treat me like an invalid. This I will not accept. But if you don't follow proper treatment protocols, you could have another episode. A worse one." I kept my voice professional, but I could feel my protective instincts engaging. This woman was needlessly risking her life out of what seemed like stubborn pride. "Child," she said gently, reaching out to pat my hand with fingers that trembled slightly. "I am 78 years old. I have buried a husband, 2 sons, and more friends than I care to count. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched this family survive enemies that would destroy us completely if they could. I will not spend whatever time I have left cowering in a sterile room, afraid of my own shadow." The mention of buried sons sent a chill down my spine. Francesco had brothers who were dead? How? When? The questions multiplied in my mind, but something in her expression warned me not to ask. "However," she continued, "I am not stupid. I understand that my condition requires monitoring, that certain precautions must be taken. If you are willing to provide that care while allowing me to maintain my dignity and independence, then we have an arrangement that serves us both." It was a reasonable compromise, and one that would challenge my skills in ways that appealed to my professional pride. But before I could answer, the sound of raised voices from downstairs interrupted our conversation, not Francesco's voice. He was too controlled for that kind of outburst. But several other men speaking in rapid Italian that sounded increasingly urgent. Francesca's expression shifted, becoming alert in a way that suggested she understood every word being said below us. "Maria," she called, and the housekeeper appeared so quickly she must have been listening at the door. A rapid exchange in Italian followed, during which Maria's face grew pale with concern. "What's happening?" I asked, the medical training in me responding to the obvious signs of distress in both women. "Business," Francesca said curtly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Nothing for you to concern yourself with." But even as she spoke, the voices downstairs grew louder, more urgent. I caught fragments, numbers, names I didn't recognize, what sounded like locations being discussed with increasing desperation. And then, cutting through everything else, Francesco's voice raised in the kind of cold fury that made my blood freeze. "Get Dr. Martinez, now, and make sure the back entrance is secure. Dr. Martinez, not a hospital emergency room, not 911, but a private doctor who could be summoned without questions." My nursing instinct screamed warnings about what kind of medical emergency would require that level of secrecy, what kind of injuries couldn't be treated through normal channels. "I should go," I said, standing abruptly. "Whatever this is, you don't need a stranger witnessing it. Sit down." Francesca's voice carried such absolute authority that I found myself obeying before I'd consciously decided to. "If you are going to work for this family, you need to understand what that means, what we are." The footsteps on the stairs were heavy, urgent, accompanied by voices speaking in the kind of terse medical terminology I recognized from trauma situations. Someone was hurt, badly, and they were bringing him here instead of to a hospital, which meant either they couldn't risk the questions a hospital would ask, or they couldn't risk being away from whatever security this house provided. "Mrs. Moretti," I said carefully, "if someone is injured, they need proper medical care, a hospital emergency room, surgical facilities if necessary. I'm a nurse, not a trauma surgeon." "Dr. Martinez has been treating this family for 30 years, she replied, her eyes never leaving my face. "He has facilities here that rival any hospital, and he understands the need for discretion that a public hospital cannot provide." The bedroom door opened without a knock, and Maria entered with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Moretti, they need faith. Mr. Francesco, he's been shot." The world tilted sideways around me. Shot. Francesco had been shot, and they wanted me to help treat him. Which meant this wasn't just a wealthy family with old-world traditions and expensive tastes. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous enough that gunfire was apparently an occupational hazard. "I'm not qualified for trauma surgery," I said, even as my training kicked in, and I found myself mentally cataloging what supplies would be needed. "If he's been shot, he needs a trauma team, an operating room. Dr. Martinez will handle the surgery," Francesca said, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "But he needs a surgical nurse, someone with the training to assist. Will you help my son, Faith?" The use of my first name, the naked plea in her voice, the knowledge that Francesco might be dying while I debated the wisdom of getting involved, it all combined to shatter my hesitation. I was a nurse. Someone was injured. Everything else was secondary to that fundamental truth. "Where is he?" Maria led me to a wing of the house I hadn't seen before, downstairs that opened into what looked like a fully equipped medical facility. Not just a first aid station, but an actual surgical suite complete with monitoring equipment, blood bank, and enough pharmaceutical supplies to stock a small hospital. This wasn't something that had been hastily assembled. This was a permanent installation, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. Francesco lay on the surgical table, conscious but pale, his shirt cut away to reveal a bullet wound high on his left shoulder. Dr. Martinez, a distinguished man in his 60s, was already prepping for surgery while two other men, clearly bodyguards based on their obvious tension and the weapons I could see holstered beneath their jackets, stood watch. "Miss Buchanan," Dr. Martinez said without looking up from his preparations, "I understand you're cardiac trained. Have you ever assisted in trauma surgery?" "Yes, during my rotation through the emergency department. Gunshot wounds, stabbings, motor vehicle accidents." I was already moving toward the scrub station, muscle memory taking over. "What's the extent of the injury?" "Through and through, missed the subclavian artery by millimeters. No major organ damage, but there's muscle and nerve involvement that needs to be addressed. Can you assist?" I nodded, scrubbing in with the thoroughness that had been drilled into me from my first day of nursing school. This was familiar territory, the clean sterility of medical emergency, where everything else fell away except the immediate need to preserve life. But as I took my position beside the table, Francesco's eyes found mine, and I saw something there that had nothing to do with pain or fear. Gratitude, yes, but also a possessive satisfaction that made my pulse quicken despite the circumstances. He was claiming me, I realized, binding me to him through this moment of vulnerability, this shared secret that would make me complicit in whatever world he inhabited. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough with pain but steady with conviction. "I won't forget this." As Dr. Martinez made the first incision, and I fell into the familiar rhythm of surgical assistance, I wondered if I was saving Francesco Moretti's life or surrendering my own to something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of precise movements in sterile silence, broken only by Dr. Martinez's quiet instructions and the steady beep of monitoring equipment that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. Francesco remained conscious throughout, refusing general anesthesia with the kind of stubborn determination that should have been alarming, but somehow seemed completely in character. I'd assisted in trauma surgeries before, but never under circumstances like these. Never in a private facility that existed in the shadows of legality. Never with armed guards standing watch at the doors. Never with the knowledge that reporting this incident could put me in danger that extended far beyond professional consequences. But as I worked, handing instruments to Dr. Martinez, monitoring Francesco's vital signs, managing the flow of the surgery with the competence that years of training had drilled into me, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just the adrenaline rush of medical emergency, but a deeper recognition that this was exactly where I belonged. Not the sterile, bureaucratic environment of the hospital, but here, in the heart of something real and immediate and vital. "Beautiful work," Dr. Martinez murmured as he completed the final sutures. "You have excellent hands, Miss Buchanan. Steady, intuitive. It's a gift not many possess." Francesco's eyes had never left my face during the procedure, watching me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt oddly intimate. Even under the stress of surgery, even with pain medications affecting his system, his gaze held that same calculating assessment I'd noticed earlier. He was cataloging my reactions, my competence, my willingness to cross lines I hadn't even known existed. "The bullet missed everything vital," Dr. Martinez announced as he began cleaning the surgical site. "Full recovery expected, though the shoulder will need time to heal properly. No strenuous activity for at least 6 weeks, Francesco. I mean it this time." "This time?" I asked before I could stop myself. A slight smile curved Francesco's lips despite the obvious discomfort. This is not my first encounter with Dr. Martinez's surgical skills. Occupational hazard in my line of work. "What exactly is your line of work?" The question had been burning in my mind for hours, and the post-surgical intimacy of the moment made it feel safe to ask. The smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "Import and export. My family has been in business for 4 generations, moving goods between Europe and America. Not all of our competitors approve of our success." It was a careful answer, technically true, but deliberately incomplete. Import and export could mean anything, from legitimate luxury goods to things that required the kind of security I'd witnessed here. The casual reference to competitors who expressed their disapproval through gunfire told me everything I needed to know about the nature of those goods. "Faith," Francesco said, as Dr. Martinez finished his work and began packing his instruments. "I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with money." "You don't owe me anything. I'm a nurse. Helping injured people is what I do." "Is it?" His eyes searched my face with uncomfortable perception. "Because what you did tonight goes far beyond professional obligation. You chose to help without knowing the circumstances, without asking questions that might have protected you from legal consequences. That kind of loyalty is rare." Loyalty. The word hung between us like a challenge, carrying implications I wasn't ready to examine. But he was right. I had made a choice, stepping into his world without understanding the full implications of that decision. And now, with his blood under my fingernails and his life in my debt, there was no going back to the innocent ignorance I'd possessed this morning. "Your mother is waiting to see you," I said, instead of responding to his implicit question. "She's been worried." In a moment. First, I need to know. Will you stay? Not just tonight, not just until I'm recovered, but permanently. My family has need of someone with your skills, someone we can trust completely. The offer was everything I'd dreamed of, and everything I'd been taught to fear. Financial security, professional respect, a place in a world where my skills would be valued beyond the bureaucratic limitations of hospital politics. But also complicity in activities that operated outside the law, loyalty to people whose business practices apparently included violence as a standard operating procedure. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. But understand this. What you've seen tonight, what you've done, creates a bond between us that cannot be severed simply because you choose to walk away. You are part of this family now, whether you accept that formally or not. The possessive certainty in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a dangerous thrill through my chest, the primitive female response to a dominant male claiming territory. I was his now, according to some instinctive recognition that operated below conscious thought, and the part of me that had always craved security and protection responded to that claim with enthusiasm that horrified my rational mind. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat diplomatically. Francesco, you need rest. The anesthesia may be local, but your body has still been through significant trauma. Miss Buchanan, you handled yourself admirably tonight. If you're interested in private practice, I could use an assistant with your skills. Another offer. Another path into a world where normal rules didn't apply. I was collecting invitations to cross lines I'd never imagined approaching, and each one felt more tempting than the last. The recovery room was as luxuriously appointed as everything else in the house, with a hospital bed that probably cost more than most people's cars and monitoring equipment that belonged in a cardiac intensive care unit. Francesco submitted to being transferred there with obvious reluctance, clearly unaccustomed to being vulnerable or dependent on others for his basic needs. The pain medication will make you drowsy, I explained as I checked his IV line and adjusted the monitors. Don't fight it. Your body needs rest to heal properly. Stay with me, he said quietly, his hand catching mine as I moved to leave. Please. The simple word, so at odds with his usual commanding tone, undid something in my chest. This was Francesco Moretti stripped of his armor, reduced to basic human need for comfort and companionship. The man who could apparently summon doctors and solve problems with a phone call was asking me not to leave him alone with his pain. I pulled a chair beside his bed and settled in for what I knew would be a long night. Post-surgical patients needed monitoring, and despite Dr. Martinez's confidence, there were always risks of complications. But beyond professional obligation, I found myself reluctant to leave. Something about his presence felt addictive, like standing too close to a fire. Dangerous, but warming in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Tell me about your family, he said, as the pain medication began to take effect, his voice growing slightly slurred, but his eyes remaining alert. There's not much to tell. My mother died when I was 17. Cancer. We couldn't afford the best treatment. The old bitterness crept into my voice despite my efforts to remain neutral. And your father? Never knew him. Mom said he was married to someone else, couldn't risk his reputation by acknowledging us. I shrugged, pretending the abandonment didn't still sting. I grew up knowing that men with power protect their interests first, everyone else second. Francesco's expression darkened with something that might have been anger, though whether at my father's abandonment or my cynical assessment of powerful men, I couldn't tell. Not all men with power are cowards, Faith. Some of us understand that our strength means nothing if we don't use it to protect what matters. And what matters to you? His eyes found mine in the dim light of the recovery room, and the intensity there made my breath catch. Family, loyalty, honor, the knowledge that when someone depends on you, you don't let them down. The conviction in his voice was absolute. The code of someone who had built his identity around principles that might be old-fashioned, but were apparently unshakable. It was so different from Vincent's flexible morality, his willingness to adjust his values based on convenience and social pressure. "Your mother told me you lost brothers," I said softly. "I'm sorry." Pain flashed across his features, deeper than what the bullet wound could account for. Antonio was killed in a car accident 5 years ago. The brake lines had been cut. He paused, letting the implication sink in. Marco died defending a shipment that someone had leaked information about. They knew exactly when and where to hit us, because someone we trusted betrayed that information. Understanding dawned cold and clear. His brothers hadn't died in random accidents or conventional business disputes. They'd been murdered, targeted because of their family connections and business activities. Francesco wasn't just dealing with competitors. He was navigating a world where betrayal was fatal and trust was the most valuable currency. "That's why you investigate everyone who enters your sphere," I said. "Why you need to know everything about people before you let them close." "Exactly. My family has learned that carelessness costs lives. But you?" He reached out to touch my hand again, his fingers warm despite the IV fluids. "You had every opportunity to hurt me tonight. You could have made mistakes during surgery, could have contacted authorities, could have demanded payment for your silence. Instead, you saved my life and asked for nothing in return. I told you, I'm a nurse. It's what I do." "No," he said firmly. "It's who you are. There's a difference." The medication was winning the battle against his consciousness, his eyelids growing heavy despite his obvious desire to continue our conversation. I watched him fight sleep with the same determination he probably brought to everything else, unwilling to surrender control even to his body's basic needs. "Rest," I murmured, checking his pulse and noting the steady rhythm that indicated stable cardiovascular function. "I'll be right here." "Promise me," he whispered, already halfway to unconsciousness. "I promise." I meant to stay awake, to monitor his condition through the critical first hours post-surgery. But the emotional exhaustion of the last 2 days, combined with the adrenaline crash that followed medical emergencies, pulled me under, despite my best intentions. I dozed in the chair beside his bed, one hand resting lightly on his wrist to feel his pulse, ready to wake at the first sign of distress. Dawn was filtering through the windows when I startled awake to find Francesco watching me, his eyes clear and alert despite the early hour. The monitors showed stable vital signs, and the color had returned to his face, all positive indicators for his recovery. "How do you feel?" I asked, immediately shifting into professional mode. "Like I was shot," he said with dry humor, "but significantly better than I expected. Your care makes a difference, Faith." I blushed at the compliment, busying myself with checking his dressings and adjusting his medication drip. The wound looked clean, no signs of infection or unusual bleeding. Dr. Martinez had done excellent work, and Francesco's natural healing seemed to be proceeding normally. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said without looking at him. "About staying, working for your family permanently. And I need to understand exactly what that would mean. What kind of situations I might be asked to handle, what risks I'd be taking, what lines I'd be expected to cross." Francesco struggled to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "The truth is, Faith, that my business operates in areas where conventional medical care isn't always an option. Sometimes injuries occur that can't be explained to hospital staff without raising uncomfortable questions. Sometimes people need treatment who can't risk the scrutiny that comes with official medical records. People like you, people like me, yes, but also others who work for me, who depend on me for protection and support. Wives and children who get caught in crossfire intended for their husbands and fathers. Innocent people who end up in dangerous situations through no fault of their own." The picture he painted was more complex than simple criminal activity. This was a community, a network of families and relationships that operated according to their own rules because the official system couldn't or wouldn't protect them. It was vigilante justice and tribal loyalty, dangerous but also oddly noble in its willingness to take responsibility for its own. And in exchange? Security like you've never imagined. Financial compensation that would make your hospital salary look like pocket change. The knowledge that your skills are being used to save lives rather than being wasted on insurance paperwork and bureaucratic nonsense. A family that will protect you as fiercely as you protect us. The offer was everything Vincent had promised, but never delivered. Security, respect, belonging. But it came with a price that included secrecy, danger, and complicity in activities that existed outside legal boundaries. It meant choosing loyalty over law, family over society, personal relationships over abstract principles. "I need one more thing," I said finally. "Name it. Complete honesty. No more careful answers or diplomatic half-truths. If I'm going to risk everything for this family, I need to know exactly what I'm risking it for." Francesco studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the value of truth against the safety of secrecy. Finally, he nodded slowly. "My family controls shipping and distribution for certain goods between Europe and America. Some of those goods carry import taxes that we consider unreasonable. Some involve substances that the government has decided should be restricted, despite significant market demand. We provide services that people need, at prices they're willing to pay, without the interference of bureaucrats who have never built anything or taken real risks. Smuggling." He was describing smuggling operations, probably drugs and weapons, possibly other contraband. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality that the Moretti family was in business with organized crime, possibly as organized crime themselves. And the violence? Competition is fierce. Not everyone believes in negotiating disputes through civilized discussion. We defend ourselves and our interests using whatever methods prove necessary. Murder. He was talking about murder, though he'd never used that word directly. The Moretti family killed people who threatened their business interests, probably with the same cold efficiency they brought to everything else. I should have been horrified. Should have been planning my escape from this house and these people before I became any more deeply involved. Should have been thinking about professional ethics and legal obligations and all the reasons why crossing these lines would destroy the respectable life I'd worked so hard to build. Instead, I found myself thinking about Vincent's casual cruelty, about the hospital administrators who treated nurses like disposable resources, about a society that had offered me nothing but obstacles and judgment, while expecting gratitude for the privilege of struggling. Francesco was offering me a place in a world where competence was valued, where loyalty was rewarded, where my skills would be used to their fullest potential. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay? I accept. All of it. The job, the risks, the family." I met his eyes directly, wanting him to see the determination in mine. "I'm in." The smile that spread across his face was nothing like the polite expressions I'd seen before. This was pure satisfaction, possessive triumph, the look of a man who had successfully claimed something he wanted. "Welcome to the family, Faith," he said, and I knew that everything I'd been before this moment had just become history. The next 2 weeks transformed my understanding of what family could mean, not the dysfunctional abandonment I'd grown up with, or the shallow performance Vincent had offered, but something deeper and more encompassing than I'd imagined possible. The Moretti house operated like a small city-state, with its own rules, traditions, and fierce loyalty that extended to everyone who lived within its walls. My days fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its unconventional nature. Mornings were spent with Francesca, monitoring her condition, and gradually earning her trust through competent care and honest conversation. She was a formidable woman who had survived decades in a dangerous world by being smarter and tougher than anyone expected from her elegant appearance. Under her guidance, I began to understand the complex social dynamics that governed their world. "A Don's wife must be many things," she told me one afternoon as I checked her blood pressure. diplomat, strategist, counselor, and when necessary, enforcer. But most importantly, she must be someone her husband can trust completely, because in our business, a moment's doubt can mean death. The comment seemed casual, but I caught the assessing look in her eyes. Francesca was evaluating me for a role I hadn't consciously applied for, measuring my potential as more than just Francesco's employee. The realization should have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt like recognition of something I'd sensed building between us since that first moment in the recovery room. Francesco's recovery progressed faster than Dr. Martinez had predicted, aided by his natural vitality and his obvious impatience with physical limitations. I served as his primary caregiver during the most vulnerable period, helping him with basic tasks, monitoring his healing, ensuring he followed medical protocols despite his inclination to resume normal activities too quickly. The intimacy forced by his temporary dependence created opportunities for conversation that revealed layers of his personality hidden beneath his public persona. He spoke about his childhood, the pressure of growing up as the heir to a legacy built on violence and respect. He told me about his education at elite universities, his deliberate cultivation of legitimate business interests that provided cover for less conventional activities. My grandfather built this empire with his fists and his willingness to do what others wouldn't, he said one evening as I changed his dressings. My father expanded it through strategic thinking and political connections. I'm trying to transform it into something that can survive in a changing world. What does that look like? I asked, noting with satisfaction that the wound was healing cleanly. Less direct confrontation, more sophisticated operations. Technology instead of crude force. Influence instead of intimidation. He paused, wincing slightly as I cleaned the area around his stitches. But the foundation remains the same. Loyalty, family, the understanding that we protect our own at any cost. The more I learned about their world, the more I understood that it operated according to principles that were both primitive and sophisticated. Trust was earned through actions rather than words. Loyalty was absolute, or it didn't exist at all. Power was respected only when it was wielded with honor and restraint. My integration into the household staff happened gradually but inexorably. Maria began consulting me about Francesca's dietary needs, deferring to my medical expertise in ways that elevated my status beyond typical employee. The security personnel, initially suspicious of any outsider, began acknowledging me with respectful nods as they recognized my acceptance by the family. But it was the evening meetings that truly marked my transition from observer to participant. Francesco had resumed limited business activities, conducting essential meetings from his study rather than his usual office downtown. Initially, I was dismissed when visitors arrived, but gradually he began allowing me to remain, first as his nurse monitoring his condition, then simply as a trusted presence. The Baltimore situation is escalating, reported a man I'd learned was Francesco's lieutenant, a compact individual with intelligent eyes and an aura of controlled violence. They're pushing into territory that's been ours for 20 years. Response? Francesco asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp with interest. Traditional approach would be direct confrontation. Send a message they can't ignore. I watched Francesco consider this, noting the careful calculation behind his expression. This was life and death decision-making, the kind of moment where one choice could determine whether people lived or died, whether territory was held or lost, whether respect was maintained or undermined. Not yet, he decided finally. Reach out through intermediaries first. Make it clear that we're willing to negotiate boundaries, but also that we're prepared to defend what's ours if negotiation fails. The lieutenant nodded approvingly. Diplomacy backed by strength. Your father would approve. These conversations revealed the sophisticated nature of Francesco's operations. This wasn't random violence or crude criminal activity, but strategic business management that happened to involve illegal goods and occasional bloodshed. The principles weren't so different from legitimate business: market control, competitive advantage, customer service. But the stakes were infinitely higher. My medical skills proved valuable beyond Francesco's personal care. Word spread through their network that the Moretti family had access to discreet medical treatment, and I found myself treating a variety of injuries and conditions that couldn't be addressed through conventional channels. Gunshot wounds that couldn't be explained to emergency room staff. Knife injuries that would prompt uncomfortable police questions. Drug overdoses that needed treatment without creating official records. Each case deepened my involvement in their world while proving my value to their operations. I developed protocols for emergency treatment, stockpiled medications and supplies, even began training some of the security personnel in basic first aid. Dr. Martinez visited regularly to consult on serious cases and gradually began treating me as a colleague rather than an assistant. "You have natural instincts for this work," he told me after we'd successfully treated a man who'd been beaten nearly to death by rivals. The ability to focus on immediate medical needs without being distracted by questions about how injuries occurred. It's a rare talent, but it was my growing relationship with Francesco that truly cemented my position in the family. What had begun as professional obligation evolved into something deeper and more complex as we spent hours together during his recovery. He was in fascinating contradiction, ruthless in business but gentle with his mother, commanding with his subordinates but vulnerable in private moments, calculating in strategic decisions, but surprisingly emotional when discussing family history. The first time he kissed me, it was supposed to be gratitude. I was adjusting his pillows, making sure he was comfortable for sleep, when he caught my hand and pulled me closer. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But the electricity that shot through me at the contact was anything but gentle, a recognition that had been building since the moment I'd first seen him bleeding on that surgical table. "I shouldn't," I whispered against his lips, even as I made no move to pull away. "Why not?" His voice was rough with desire and something deeper. "Because of professional ethics? Because you work for me? Because I'm not the kind of man you plan to fall in love with?" The word love hung between us like a challenge, premature but somehow inevitable. This wasn't the careful courtship I'd imagined for myself, the safe relationship with a respectable man who would offer conventional security. This was dangerous and consuming, and completely outside the boundaries of the life I'd planned. "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back," I said, acknowledging the truth we'd both been avoiding. "There's already no going back, Faith. Not for either of us. You're mine now, whether we admit it or not. The only question is whether we're going to fight what we both want, or embrace it." His possessive certainty should have triggered every warning bell in my system. I'd spent my entire adult life struggling for independence, fighting to prove I didn't need anyone's protection or support. But with Francesco, that independence felt less like strength and more like stubborn isolation from the very connection I'd been craving without knowing it. I kissed him back, pouring weeks of suppressed attraction and growing emotional attachment into the contact. His response was immediate and hungry, one hand tangling in my hair, while the other pulled me closer despite the limitation of his healing shoulder. We were both breathing hard when we finally broke apart, the air between us charged with the recognition that everything had just changed irrevocably. "Tomorrow," he said against my forehead, "we tell my mother. Make this official." "Official how?" "However you want it to be. Engagement, marriage, whatever words make you comfortable. But no more pretending this is just about nursing care or professional obligation." The speed of it should have been terrifying. 3 weeks ago, I'd been planning a conventional life with Vincent, following the safe path I'd mapped out for myself. Now I was contemplating marriage to a man whose business involved activities I couldn't discuss with outsiders, whose world operated according to rules I was still learning. But as I looked into Francesco's eyes, seeing the intensity of his commitment and the promise of a future unlike anything I'd dared imagine, I realized that safety had always been an illusion anyway. Vincent's betrayal had taught me that conventional morality was no guarantee of decent treatment, that respectability could coexist with casual cruelty. Francesco offered something different: honesty about his nature, transparency about the risks, complete commitment to protecting what he valued. The criminal aspects of his business were balanced by a code of honor that seemed more reliable than the flexible ethics of legal society. "What does being part of this family really mean?" I asked, needing to understand the full scope of what I was accepting. "It means you'll never want for anything material. It means you'll have protection that extends beyond anything money can buy. It means your skills will be valued and your counsel respected." He paused, his expression growing serious. "But it also means accepting that some of our decisions involve violence, that sometimes people who threaten us don't survive those threats, that loyalty to family comes before loyalty to abstract legal principles." I thought about my mother, who had died because we couldn't afford proper treatment. I thought about Vincent, who had discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. I thought about the hospital administrators who saw nurses as replaceable cogs in a profit-generating machine. None of them had offered the kind of security and respect Francesco was promising. "I accept," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "All of it." His smile was triumphant, possessive, the expression of a man who had successfully claimed something precious. "Then welcome to your real life, Faith. Everything else was just preparation." As he pulled me down for another kiss, I felt the last vestiges of my former existence falling away. I was no longer Faith Buchanan, struggling nursing school graduate who dreamed of respectable middle-class security. I was becoming someone new, Francesco Moretti's woman, a member of a family whose power was built on blood and loyalty, whose protection was absolute, and whose expectations were equally uncompromising. The transformation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but as Francesco's hands framed my face with surprising gentleness, I knew there was nowhere else I'd rather be. The engagement party was everything I'd never known I wanted, not the gaudy display Vincent had planned, with its desperate attempt to impress people who would never truly accept us, but an intimate gathering of Francesco's family and closest associates that felt like a true celebration of belonging. The house was transformed with flowers and candles, creating an atmosphere of elegant warmth that spoke to Francesca's impeccable taste and Maria's attention to detail. I wore a dress that had appeared in my closet that morning, midnight blue silk that hugged my curves perfectly, and somehow made me feel both sophisticated and completely myself. The engagement ring Francesco had presented the night before caught the light with every movement, a vintage piece that had belonged to his grandmother, heavy with family history and the weight of tradition. "You look radiant, my dear," Francesca said as she surveyed the gathering from her position on the terrace. Her health had stabilized remarkably over the past month, aided by careful monitoring, and her obvious happiness at seeing her son settled with someone she approved of. "Francesco has excellent taste in women, though he inherited that from his father." The comment carried layers of meaning I was still learning to decode. Francesco's father had reportedly loved only one woman in his entire life, remaining faithful to Francesco's mother, even when business considerations might have suggested more strategic marriages. It was another piece of the complex moral code that governed their world. Absolute loyalty in personal relationships, even when professional obligations required flexibility. "Mrs. Moretti," I began, but she held up an elegant hand to stop me. "Francesca, please. We are family now. And family means that my concerns become your concerns. My enemies become your enemies." Her dark eyes, so like her son's, held mine with uncomfortable directness. "Do you understand what that means, Faith?" Before I could answer, a commotion near the front entrance drew our attention. Voices raised in urgent Italian, the sound of cars arriving faster than expected, the subtle but unmistakable tension that meant business was intruding on family celebration. Francesco appeared at my side almost instantly, his hand settling possessively on my lower back, while his eyes scanned the disturbance with predatory alertness. "What is it?" I asked, noting how quickly the relaxed atmosphere had shifted to something more dangerous. "Probably nothing," he replied, but I could feel the coiled tension in his muscles. "Excuse me for a moment." He moved toward the house with that fluid grace I'd come to associate with moments when he was shifting from elegant host to dangerous predator. The other men at the party, and I'd learned to recognize them all as soldiers in Francesco's organization, began positioning themselves with casual efficiency that spoke to years of practice dealing with unexpected situations. I was watching this carefully choreographed response when Maria appeared at my elbow, her face pale with concern. "Miss Faith, there are men at the front gate. They say they are police, but they are not wearing uniforms. They want to speak with you specifically." My blood ran cold. Police asking for me by name meant someone had connected me to the Moretti family, had somehow discovered my involvement in activities that couldn't bear official scrutiny. The surgery on Francesco, the various medical treatments I'd provided to people with suspicious injuries, my growing knowledge of family business. Any of it could be enough to charge me as an accessory to serious crimes. "Did they show identification?" I asked, falling back on practical questions, while my mind raced through possibilities. "Mr. Francesco is handling it," Maria replied, which wasn't really an answer, but suggested the situation was being managed according to family protocols. Through the windows, I could see Francesco in heated discussion with several men in suits. Their body language was aggressive, confrontational, the posture of people accustomed to having their authority acknowledged without question. But Francesco's stance was equally unyielding, the immovable confidence of someone on his own territory dealing with unwelcome intruders. "Faith." The voice behind me was familiar in the worst possible way, carrying echoes of a life I'd thought was permanently behind me. I turned to find Vincent standing on the terrace, somehow having bypassed whatever security measures should have prevented his access to the party. He looked different, thinner, more desperate around the edges, his expensive suit unable to disguise the tension that radiated from every line of his body. But his eyes held the same calculating assessment that had once made me feel special and now made my skin crawl with recognition of the manipulation behind it. "Vincent." I kept my voice level, professional, though every instinct screamed at me to call for help. "How did you get in here?" "I'm a cop, Faith. Detective Vincent Morrison, NYPD Organized Crime Task Force." He displayed a badge with the same theatrical flourish he'd once used to present expensive gifts. "Turns out your new boyfriend has been under investigation for quite some time." The revelation hit like a physical blow, not because I hadn't suspected Francesco's criminal activities, but because Vincent's involvement added layers of complexity I hadn't anticipated. My ex-fiancé was a police officer, specifically one investigating organized crime. Our entire relationship had been built on his professional interest in getting close to people connected to the Moretti family. "You used me," I said, understanding flooding through me with sickening clarity. From the beginning, everything was about getting information. "I protected you," he corrected, his tone carrying that familiar condescension. "For 18 months, I kept you safe from knowing what kind of people you were getting involved with. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Had to go running to the first criminal who showed you attention. At least Francesco is honest about who he is." Vincent's laugh was ugly, full of contempt. "Honest? Faith, the man you're planning to marry has killed 12 people that we know of. He runs drugs, guns, stolen goods through half the East Coast. The money that bought that pretty dress you're wearing comes from misery and addiction and violence." Each accusation landed with the precision of someone who had spent considerable time building a case, but they bounced off the certainty I'd developed about Francesco's character. Yes, he was involved in illegal activities. Yes, violence was part of his world, but he'd also shown me more genuine care and protection in 6 weeks than Vincent had offered in 18 months of pretended devotion. "What do you want, Vincent?" "I want you to come home, back to your real life, away from these people before you get yourself killed," His voice softened into the persuasive tone I remembered from our early days together. I know you're confused, traumatized by everything that happened. Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing, Faith. You're identifying with your captors because they've shown you kindness after putting you in danger. Francesco didn't put me in danger. You did, when you threw me out in a storm to die in an alley. I was angry. I made a mistake. The admission came grudgingly, as if acknowledging fault was physically painful. But I'm here now, offering you a chance to fix this before it's too late. Too late for what? The indictments are coming down next week. RICO charges, conspiracy, murder, racketeering. Everyone in this house is going to be arrested, and anyone connected to them becomes a target for rival families looking to fill the power vacuum. Vincent stepped closer, his voice dropping to urgent whisper. Work with us. Provide testimony about what you've seen, what you know. In exchange, full immunity and witness protection. The offer was everything I should have wanted. A chance to escape the dangerous world I'd stumbled into. Legal protection. A return to the conventional life I'd planned before Francesco's intervention had changed everything. But as I looked at Vincent's face, seeing the calculation behind his apparent concern, I realized he was still using me. Still seeing me as a tool to achieve his professional objectives, rather than a person whose choices deserved respect. And if I refuse? Then you go down with them. Accessory charges, conspiracy, maybe even RICO prosecution if they can prove you were actively participating in family business. His expression hardened. You're a smart woman, Faith. Do the math. Through the windows, I could see Francesco returning from his confrontation with the federal agents, his face grim with controlled anger. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw him take in Vincent's presence with the kind of immediate recognition that suggested he'd been expecting this moment. Your boyfriend knows I'm here, Vincent said, following my gaze. He's calculating whether to have me killed or try to buy me off. Want to know which option I think he'll choose? He won't hurt a police officer at his own engagement party, I said with more confidence than I felt. Won't he? Faith, you have no idea what these people are capable of when they feel threatened. The only thing keeping me alive right now is that killing a cop brings heat even the Moretti family can't handle. Francesco was moving toward us now, flanked by two of his lieutenants, his expression unreadable, but his intentions clear. This was a confrontation that had been building since the moment I'd entered his world. The collision between my old life and new loyalty that I'd somehow convinced myself could be avoided. Detective Morrison, Francesco said as he reached us, his voice carrying the polite hostility of a predator addressing unwelcome prey. How thoughtful of you to attend our engagement party, though I don't recall extending an invitation. Consider it a professional courtesy call, Vincent replied, his own voice tight with suppressed tension. Thought I should warn my ex-fiancé about the kind of man she's planning to marry. And what kind of man would that be? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with the potential for violence that seemed to crackling like electricity. I could feel the other party guests positioning themselves, could see weapons being subtly revealed by men who had moved beyond patience with this intrusion. The kind who destroys everything he touches, Vincent said, his eyes never leaving Francesco's face. Faith, this man will get you killed. If not by his enemies, then by his business partners when he decides you know too much to be allowed to live. Enough. Francesco's voice carried such absolute authority that even Vincent instinctively stepped back. You've delivered your message, detective. Now you can leave my property before I decide you're trespassing. I'm not leaving without Faith. Yes, Francesco said with deadly softness. You are. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, 3 lives hanging in the balance of decisions that would reshape everything I'd built over the past month. Vincent was offering me safety at the cost of betraying people who had shown me genuine loyalty. Francesco was demanding I choose his world over the conventional morality I'd been raised to respect. And I was caught between them, holding the power to save or destroy both men with whatever choice I made. But as I looked at Vincent's face, seeing the manipulation behind his concern, and then at Francesco, seeing the genuine pain at the thought of losing me, the decision was simpler than I'd expected. "I choose Francesco," I said clearly, loudly enough for everyone present to hear. "I choose this family, this life, all of it." Vincent's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, anger, resignation, and finally a cold calculation that was more frightening than his threats had been. "You're making a mistake, Faith. One that will cost you everything." "Maybe," I replied, moving to stand beside Francesco, accepting the protective arm he wrapped around my waist. "But it's my mistake to make." As Vincent was escorted from the property by men whose intentions he was wise not to test, I felt the last connection to my former life severing cleanly. Whatever happened next, arrests, trials, violence from rivals who sensed weakness, I would face it as part of the Moretti family, protected by their strength and bound by their loyalty. Francesco's kiss was possessive, triumphant, a claiming that marked me as irrevocably his in front of everyone who mattered. When we broke apart, I could see approval in Francesca's eyes, satisfaction in the faces of the men who served her son, acceptance from the women who had married into this world before me. "Welcome home," Francesco murmured against my ear, and I knew that whatever the cost of this choice, I was exactly where I belonged.